Hello. Um, Good afternoon, good evening, whatever is appropriate for you while viewing this material. Um, what I want to talk about is the selection of materials as it occurs in the library. We'll talk a little bit about uh, the processes, the theories, and um, a selection of tools, but not an entire complete selection of tools. And then we'll talk about the assignment that will be due later. Now, the first thing you have to realize is that there's methods of collection development. That represents the users of the library. Um, there's two aspects to this one. This is taken to some extent from the book, but I'd like to talk about these a little bit more. The users of the library, one is knowing who the users of the library are. The community in a public library, the teachers and students of a school library, the professors and the students of an academic library. That's one aspect. The other is the fact that the users of the library often request materials to be added to the library. So it's a two-level. They're requesting materials for the library, plus they are you have to look at them as the users of the library. And then, of course, there are sources that selection or collection development people use to determine what books, what materials, what e-materials to purchase for the library. Now, there's a couple other things that you need to consider. One is what exists in the library at the moment that you come in. You know, what is the existence of the library? Then what you have to do is you have to determine the gaps in the collection that exist. In other words, you look at the library as a whole, and then you sit there and you say, what is important to add to the library? You can do this in one real existing way would be to look at the collection, actually walk to the shelves and look at the collection and see what exists and where the gaps are. The other would be to do a variety of searches in the the integrated library system to examine an area of the collection and then look at it and say, oh, it's got new materials in this area and it's very good, but there's this area that I think could use a little bit more. And then, of course, there's the question of evaluating that, to examine that and to evaluate the collection. And then prioritizing the purchase. Now, you certainly probably don't have enough money to buy everything to replace at one time, so you have to prioritize your purchases as to what you need at the time to fill in those gaps. Now, there's a couple collection theories. They're mentioned mostly in the book on page 93, where you can see a variety of them, including the book that Ranganathan wrote, which has the section of his 5 laws within it. But there are a number of different ones, and they tell you what is important in each one. One of them that is not mentioned in there is a Baltimore library director named Charlie Robinson, who said, quote, give them what they want. In other words, that a library should have just the materials that the population wants. Where you're going to be lacking, and a lot of people talked about, this is a good statement, but it's lacking a lot. One is it's lacking making sure that you have all the books that a library should have, as they refer to as mirrors and windows. In other words, to collect for everyone in the community, not just what they want. In other words, the people who want, what they want are the people who use the library, and what you want to do is you want to be able to have enough materials to try to bring people in to some extent. The other problem with this would be it's kind of short on the level of classics, books that are not heavily used but are still needed by students. there's usually an AP list, when they teach AP English, that says that that the students need to read certain books, and they tend to be classical books from the past. So it's not necessarily what they want, but you have to have enough materials to be able to help the students read materials which may not be the most current materials, but rather the materials that they need to read for classes. Now, within the budget, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but there's usually a director of libraries, and then in many places there may be a head of collections. And what they do is the director and head of collections establish budgets that they distribute to the various selectors. So many dollars for in a public library, so many dollars for children, so many dollars for adult services, nonfiction, so many dollars for fiction. For an academic library, it might be the librarian that covers English, and the librarian who covers sociology, and the librarian who covers history, the librarian who covers the science. So when it comes to budgeting, there are usually about 4 methodologies. There may be more, but 4 that I'd like to talk about. The primary one that most libraries use is what's called an incremental budget, or past practice. Incremental budget is one where the same number of dollars is given to each area, but say the library, books always increase in cost. And so the library will say, we're going to give an extra 2% across the board to each and every department. Each and every librarian gets a 2% increase. Problem with that would be a science might go up by 3%, and English might only go up 1%. But if you do 2% across the board, English is going to get more money than they've had in the past, whereas science is going to continually lose. It all depends on the area. Usually in public Publishers Weekly, they have a issue which tells you what particular areas are going to increase in any given year. Now, one I've also been involved in quite a bit as a selector is what's referred to as a negotiated budget. In other words, what I would say is I'd write a report, and I would say that my collection area needs to be so many dollars, an increase of such and such. I had this much last year, but I know that it's going to cost this much more, and I need to increase these areas of the collection, and so I make a negotiation for what, as a selector, what I need, and then those go up to the head of collections director, who sits there and takes that into account and associates budgets across. One selector might get 1% if that's what they need. The next professor might get, or the next selector might get 2%, and another one might get 3%. All depends. In other words, the number of dollars that are available are distributed, but they're not distributed equally across the collection areas. And then, of course, there's a participated budget, which is one where a group of selectors get together and negotiate amongst themselves in a participation, in a committee fashion, what they need. And that's done usually with whoever's associating the director, like a head of collections. And so then they work as a committee to develop that budget. Zero-based budgeting is not used commonly, but it is a common term where you start with the idea that each year you start out with 0 and increase a little bit for each year. In other words, you have $0 and you're going to be so many dollars to match what you need. And so it starts as if everyone's starting at 0 and developing what they need for that year. The primary ones used are incremental or negotiated. or participation, but usually incremental or negotiated. Now, when it comes to deciding what things to get, there are usually a variety of lists. Lists developed by vendors or vendor lists, publication lists, and core lists. Core lists are very common. What a core list does is it simply says, it just gives a list of titles in an area, like, say, academic English department. You need to have these specific titles, say American Lit or something, or even nonfiction. There's a variety of core lists, but basically it's just saying that these are the books that you need to have in order to develop the collection correctly. In other words, a specific list of titles in a specific list of area that says that all these titles should be available. A lot of time core lists are used by, in academia, core lists are used by accreditation institutions, making sure that you have a specific set of books or publications in the library that you should have. Publication lists are similar, but they're usually done in journals and such, whereas a core list tends to be in a book or a book type material. Vendor lists are very common, but vendor lists are like each year. Each year you should have these titles. Lists are handy because they give you something to work from. Now, when it comes to lists or publications or reviews, they can be print reviews or print electronic reviews. Common ones used are Publishers Weekly, a publication called Kirkus, which hits a lot of school, but a little bit more than that. Book Page, which is a monthly publication that comes out and reviews books in all levels, from children's or adults, fiction, mystery reviews, etc. Another one would be Choice, which is for academia. The reviews in Choice are written by faculty members of that field. In other words, if there's an English book review, it's done by an English professor, but mostly by professors in that field, and it's aimed for academia. Library Journal has quite a few reviews on different arranged by category, usually Dewey number, and then at the end it'll have a list of the most popular books sold in America during that month, usually taken from something like New York Times. As a matter of fact, New York Times and NPR are used quite heavily, especially by patrons of a public library who will hear a review on NPR and then decide that the library should have that material. And it's a good idea for the librarian in a public library especially to listen to NPR and read the New York Times book reviews. Another one to consider are American libraries in all the specific sections of American Libraries Association, such as public libraries or CRL publications for colleges. There's different ones. Each one of them tends to have reviews. Say in the public library publication, reviews of that type. There is a school library section from the American Libraries, which is very good for school libraries, but also used heavily by children librarians in public libraries. Another one to consider are journals. Journals of the field that you're reading. This is primarily in academia, but you might read. A history professor might read history journals because there'll be reviews in the history publications. And so you would look at actual journals for history and find reviews in there for it. There are also publications of reviews. And then, of course, there's textbooks lists and other publications. When I say other publications, what I mean are like um, uh, different types of different types of like that's where I would classify a few of like NPR or the New York Times Book Review. Again, this is not exactly exhaustive. There are many lists, especially many new electronic lists that come out that have book reviews. I'm thinking things like Amazon, um, Good Books, these type of publications. Even though many of them are electronic, have very good materials. You can do a variety of searches, say for example in Amazon, to find books that match up a certain category. There's no way I can be exhaustive on the list. There are so many. Now, another process that occurs are for approval plans, usually for academia, and leasing books for public libraries. Now, what an approval plan is it's a plan that is developed between the library and the company that supplies the approval plan, where the book is automatically sent to the library. In other words, the company looks at all the various cataloging of the book, and various other parameters of the book that the library says that if the book matches these parameters, automatically send us the book. If the parameters are off a little bit, sometimes the approval plan will send a slip in its place, and it could be a paper slip or an electronic slip, but they send a slip of a book that was not sent on an approval plan but is very close. And so a selector has two options. One is they can look at the slips. Well, they have two options. They look at the slips and decide if there are any additional books that they want. And the books that are automatically sent, there are two methodologies that libraries use. The primary one that was used for years is the approval books are put on a shelf for about a week. Selectors come and look at the books, decide if they want to add the book or if the book should be put into a different part of the collection, or completely deny the book and have it sent back to the vendor as one that doesn't really meet the needs of the library. Approval plan is supposed to be so good that only a limited number of books are sent back. Most books are chosen. If many books are sent back, the approval plan needs to be renegotiated. As a matter of fact, the approval plan company usually sends people to the library to renegotiate on an annual or every year or every 2 years what they supply to make sure that it's meeting the needs of the library, and the library hasn't changed in some fashion where the approval plan needs to be have sections rewritten. The company wants to be able to send books that are selected. Some libraries nowadays automatically select all approval books regardless. They still put them on the shelf so that they can be slid from one area to the other, but all books that are sent are automatically added to the collection. And then if it's not really meeting the needs, then they renegotiate. Leasing books are used primarily by public libraries to be able to handle when many copies are needed. It's done in two ways. An example would be Harry Potter books. The library, when the first Harry Potter books come out, the library might order 100 plus to be able to meet the needs of all the users. And then when the time has passed where as many books are needed for the library as they can return the leased books and keep only the copies that they actually need. They might go from Harry Potter, might go from 100 plus down to like maybe a dozen or less than a dozen books on the shelf after the time is left. The other option is they get a book in the library, and then suddenly there are like many holds on the book, many holds on what in the movie or whatever, and the library realizes that there are many holds on the item, and so what they do is they lease books to cover the holds, and then as soon as the holds go down, then they return the leased books back again. Sometimes leased books could be a lot, like with Harry Potter, or it could be just a couple, 3 books that the library needs to handle holds until the holds dissipate. Sometimes the library will sit there and say, if there are X number of holds, they automatically lease additional copies. Now, for the selection assignment, what I want you to do is look at 7 different print or electronic publication sources. First, provide the type of librarian would use these sources: children, adult, college, school, whatever librarian is. It doesn't even have to be, it could be a sentence at the beginning that says this is for a college English librarian. It could say at the beginning it's for a children's librarian in a public library. It could be a children's librarian in a school library. It could be a high school, whatever. That could simply be the title of the paper to let me know what kind of librarian are going to use these 7 different print or electronic publications. These are ones where you would look at the different print and electronic publication sources and say, if I was a children's librarian, I would use this source. Write a paragraph on the source. It doesn't have to be a lengthy paragraph. It just has to be a paragraph that says the source does this. And then I'd like you to list pros and cons, 1 sentence each. In other words, you'll have a paragraph about the source telling what the source does, and then you're going to list pros and cons as bullet points, and the pros and cons will only be about a sentence long. So about a paragraph for each source, and then a list of maybe however many pros and cons you have. A couple 3, 4, 3 or 4, or a couple 3, 4 pros and a couple 3, 4 cons. The cons and the pros only need to be about a sentence long. Then what I'd like you to do is, with a budget of $750, show a list of books ordered using these sources. The easiest way to do that is with a spreadsheet with the order information for the books and the source used to locate the book. This would be a theoretical ordering of books. So, you're not actually obviously ordering the books. You're just giving me a list that you would provide to, say, to the acquisitions department of a library of what books you'd want. So, I told you to select the books, but this is a proposed method of a spreadsheet. The top line, this is not the way you need to do it, but this is one recommendation I would have, is the top line would include the budget allotted, $750. And then each line of your order is going to include the author title, ISBN for the book, costs for the book, possibly a debit from the allotment, the date ordered, and the date received, and the source used. Now, the date ordered would be the date that you actually ordered the book. There would be no receive date because none of these books are going to actually be received because you're not ordering them. But you have in your spreadsheet, you have a receive date. And then you have the source you used to order from which you would have ordered the book. In other words, whatever source it is, you would just simply make a notation of the source. Now, it's handy to use a debit from the allotment as a subtraction. I said substitution, I mean subtraction from the cost of the allotment. So basically, you've got the cost of the book, and then you're going to have a debit of that cost, which is a subtraction from the allotment. You could do that as a formula, and it makes life easier. In other words, you have the cost of the book, and then you take that cost and subtract it from the top line allotment. And as you order books, that number goes from $750 to zero. Use all the money, but be close to the allotment. I will allow you to go over budget by about $25. So a good selector is going to use all the money that's been allotted to them. There is no way that a selector can be precise to exactly $750. That would be very, very difficult. But you can get as close as possible without going over. A good selector, as a rule, if they're given some number like $750, they're going to develop it so that they're spending a 1/12 of that each month. That would be the theory. Of course, this is just going to be an assignment that you do at the moment. So you're going to spend all $750. Now, if you have any questions, you can send a message to the virtual office. You can send me an email. Or you can post a question on the discussion page. I'll raise some of these topics in the discussion page to cover it to some extent. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. I can set up times to, talk about this a little bit more. If there are any questions, please let me know. Thank you. So, the short answer is to take a look at the possible sources for a particular librarian. Again, thank you.